All right, my name is Darren Sweeney. I am the global training manager for Hope 61, and I also had the privilege of being a crew member with my good friend Rob Decou that we're going to talk to here today. How's it going, Rob?
Good. It's great to be here, Darren.
It's awesome, man. It's so good to be here together. So, one of the big things about Rob is not only is he an amazing guy, but he loves to do these crazy endurance events that we're going to get into and talk about today. But the first thing I wanted to talk about is not just the fact that you do these crazy events, but why you do them. So Rob, tell me a little bit about why you do these crazy events.
So I got into ultra endurance events probably about 20 years ago. So it's been a long approach. And early on when I got into them, I was trying to find a way to have impact. And it's like, how can I use my passion for sports to raise money and awareness for different events? And so I did that for a while. And in the beginning, a lot of people see me over the last 4 or 5 years and they just see like, oh, he's so successful, he finished these things, they raise a lot of money. But the first long stretch of that, you try these things and it seemed like no matter how much time you put in you get back about $2 to $10 an hour. So it's like you pour in just hundreds of hours, all this energy, trying to connect with people. But these it was since Race Across America about 4 years ago. It was my first multiple day ultra endurance event, and we ended up raising a pretty substantial amount of money for brain cancer research. And the main reason I chose that year was I'd had this good friend of mine, Christina Allman, pass away of brain cancer about 3 years before the race. And so it was, just to honor her, share her story, and also raise money for, to find a cure for it. And it was the first time that all the pieces had come together, like the athletic part and, sharing the story and getting that connection and just that authentic experience with it. And so since then, I've been focused on how can I duplicate this experience in other events, and how can I focus my energy on the way that God created me to have the most amount of impact in the world. And so that's what I've been doing since then, the last 5 years, just finding different events, finding different causes that I feel passionate about, and then using the event, the ultra endurance event, as just a focal point to bring people's attention. I feel like God gives us these platforms, and the reason you have these platforms is not for your own glory, but only to share with people about Him and about how we can be used through Him. So that's kind of what I do. Is I have this fanatic wiring that God gave me, and I'm able to express that in the fullest, and in the midst of that, to raise money and awareness for these causes I care about.
And real fast, I just have to talk about, you mentioned Christina Amann, and Rob, you and I have been friends since high school, way back when. And we were on staff when we were in high school, for our junior high youth groups. And Christina was one of our middle schoolers. And so to watch her journey, and it was such an amazing story. And, I had the privilege of going to a worship night at her house as she was preparing to go on and be with the Lord. And, I've never been a part of a worship time that just felt more real than being with someone who's about to go meet Jesus. And it was such a special time. And so with that, so you use these events to raise money for different causes and organizations. So one of those just happened to be Hope 61, an organization that fights human trafficking. So tell me how you got into wanting to fight against human trafficking, and then tell me about your partnership with Hope 61.
Yeah, it's been kind of a long journey, and it's one of those things that it's interesting in my marriage. I drive my wife crazy sometimes because she's like, what are you passionate about? What do you want to do? And I was like, I like helping other people, and I like empowering other people. And she's like, no, there has to be something that you like to do. And I'm one of those, I'm kind of like a sponge. Whoever I'm around, I tend to absorb all that stuff. So I have to be careful with it, because if I hang out with people that are doing stuff that's not as in the direction I want to go, I tend to veer off that way. So I'm very careful to surround myself by positive people, to pick goals that, how can I continual and never-ending improvement on myself, with my business, my relationship with my family. And so I'm off on that track of surrounding myself by positive people. And so I'm going to step back to where this started, and that's actually back in high school. So Darren, my freshman year of high school, we were both on the wrestling team, and
let me just start off by saying Rob was on the wrestling team. I was good enough to be on varsity, but not good enough to win any matches. No. So it's questionable if you could say I was on the wrestling team. But anyway, go ahead.
And it was one of those, I was in this phase of life where I was doing everything I could to kind of find my place, and I found the more I did, the emptier I got. It was like, I'd do more, I'd engage myself in more clubs, and I'd join all the sports teams, and I just got busier and more exhausted, and it was one of those, like I thought that each new thing that I did I would find this peace, and I found the opposite. I kept getting more anxious, and it was like, I just couldn't do enough to kind of get over that longing I had. And I remember in the wrestling season, so I did football, wrestling, and track, and it was during wrestling where I met Darren. And I was wrestling, and I was terrible in the beginning too, but I progressed pretty quickly. And I remember there was this one tournament, and I'm pretty sure it was a 4th place medal. I got this medal, and I don't know why they were giving medals for 4th place, but that was my goal that year, was to get a medal in wrestling. And so I remember being so excited, and I got this thing. And finally, I was heading back to the bus, and I took a shower, I got dressed, and I remember walking back to the bus and realizing, like, I had this homework assignment and this and that, and that excitement that I had, which lasted for about 20 minutes, was gone. And I was left empty, and I was just like, man. And I'd walk back to the bus, and I went to the back of the bus and was kind of hang out with the older group. And then Darren was up at the front, so I kind of walked up as the bus was driving. I kind of pushed him aside, and Darren was wearing this shirt with a lion with a crown of thorns on its head. And I was like, Darren, how are you so happy? And his response was, Jesus Christ. And I was like, no, I don't want to hear that religion crap. How are you so happy? And he was like, it's a personal relationship with the loving God. And I remember we sat there for probably an hour and a half on the drive back, and just kind of talking through things. And I remember being angry with you, but I was angry because I knew you were right, and it was like, this is what I'm missing, and I knew it. So I accepted Christ on the bus, and then and that kind of was really a 180 in my life. And and since then it kind of led me down this path of following Christ and seeking to have impact with the gifts that He's given me. So that was the start of it. And then, moving down the road, about 2 years ago, we'd been talking back and forth and kept in touch. And then you were going to a training in Portland, Oregon. And I was like, I'd love to see Darren. So I was like, I'll go to the training. So I booked a flight, went to Portland, and it was with Hope 61. And I knew it was a training around fighting human trafficking, but I didn't realize it was a train the trainer for the groups. And so basically their team from all over the world came in.
You didn't realize you were getting sucked into the Hope 61 family. Yeah.
So during that weekend, it was just, and I've had other friends of mine that are missionaries that are working with domestic violence and with human trafficking prevention and awareness. So I've been around that for for a few years. But that weekend really kind of crystallized, like, I want to, like, this is what I kind of want to focus on the next few years. And it's also one of the big causes for one of the past district governors that's really been supportive of me over the years. She was the one that helped me raise the massive amount of money for polio.
And this is with Rotary, right? Past governors with Rotary.
Yeah, past district governor for District 5280. So with all the matching grants and stuff, we were able to raise over $700,000. So it really kind of put what I do and my work with Rotary kind of on that scale, that kind of anything we want to do, we can get a lot of community and club support. And one of her big passion areas is fighting human trafficking and domestic violence. Mm. So it's right in that thing. And so I was, so that weekend kind of helped crystallize, like, let's do something big around this, and do everything that I can to help with the awareness and that campaign. So that was kind of the deciding moment on it, if I remember right. And and then after that it was
let's stop right here. Yeah.
Rob, you had mentioned that weekend with Hope 61, that training to train the trainer, and I have to admit that was a time that I didn't know I was getting sucked into Hope 61, and I mean that in a great way. But I left that weekend I feel like knowing too much. Like I learned enough to say, okay, I can't just sit back and not do anything about this anymore. Like now that I know about human trafficking and what's going on in our world today, I have to do something about it. But with that weekend and that training, what was something that you walked away from that really impacted you, besides a great time with?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing about that training was just seeing the different people from all over the world that cared so much about it. Just the numbers of it, like just how prevalent, and it's not just, it's a few things. It's how prevalent it is, but also just how widespread across all of our communities it is. So whether you're in a small town, like we grew up in Port Angeles at 20,000, like it's there, or if you're in these big cities. And a lot of the big cities, like when I was living in Los Angeles, people don't even think it's there. And it's like, that's one of the hubs of human trafficking in the United States. And people are so unaware of it going on. And for me, that's, I always go back to this quote. I remember I wrote my whole senior thesis and philosophy on it. It's Edmund Burke is attributed to it, but it's the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. And for me, it's when you get exposed to something and you're aware of it, if you have the means and the ability, it's like, how can you not do something? And for me, I kind of wait until I have enough little triggers from the world, and it's like I have enough friends and enough people around me going towards a particular thing. And for me, the fighting human trafficking was that. Like I have enough indicators that it's like, I feel like God's telling me to step into this space and to spend a couple years focusing on it. And so once you kind of make that decision, a lot of things for me are like that. Like you decide something, and when I decide something, you're all in. Like you're just like, I'm gonna pursue this. I'm gonna learn as much as I can about it. I'm gonna learn how I can have the most impact, how I can connect myself with this, how I can connect other people, and then I'm just gonna head down this path. And as long as I'm moving forward, like whatever it takes, I'm just kind of going down that. And so that weekend was another major contributor to that. And then after the weekend, I remember going back to LA, and then at some point I connected with Cosette again. It's like, well, what do we want to do? What does this look like? And one of the things on my list was I'd heard about these ultra triathlons, and I was looking at like a triple or quad. They call them anvil triathlons. And a triple, you basically do 3 triathlons in a row, but you do the swim so instead of 2.4 miles, you would do 7.2 miles. You do the swim as a brick, and then you do the bike and the run. And so I reached out to a bunch of race directors, and they won't let recumbents ride on their courses. So I was like, oh, I can't do that, or if I do, I need to train up on a standard bike. And I have some tendonitis issues on my elbow, so I just have some stress issues that come up, and I just don't like riding standard bikes as much as the recumbents. So I was looking at some other options, and I was like, I ran across this video of a guy who did an open course over in like Europe area. And I was like, I wonder if there's any, like I could do something like that. And so I kind of thought about creating my own course. And then I'd found this course in Southern California called Uberman that started in 2015. And so I researched it a little, and the thing that made me the most nervous is the swim part. So it's a 21-mile swim from Catalina to Palos Verdes, and then a 400-mile bike ride into Badwater Basin, and then the Badwater 135. And for me, like the bike riding was, I was super excited about it because after solo race across America, like I love cycling. I'm great at it. If I can ride my recumbent, like I can go as long as you need me to go. And the running, 2 years before that, I'd done the Badwater 146. So from the lowest point in the middle of the summer, across Death Valley up to the Whitney Portal, and then all the way up to the summit of Whitney. So I was very familiar with it, and it's almost like holy ground for trail runners. Like there's something spiritual about passing through the desert. So the bike and the run section where I was like, oh, this course is pretty much made for me. The only thing was the swim. So it's an open water swim from Catalina Island to Palos Verdes, which is 21 miles. And I've only done 2 Ironman in my life. And the first one, my goal on the swim was to not drown and to make the time cutoff. And literally, like, I'm such a poor swimmer. Like I was, you're paddling and I'm choking on the water, and and so I had to do a bunch of training just to get through that first swim. And I remember being on the bike that first Ironman, and I was about 20 miles into it, and I got that flush of euphoria, and you're just like, thank God I'm not in the water. Like, thank God I'm not in the water. And I've gotten better at swimming over the years, but it's still just, it's something I'm not very strong at. I have some shoulder injuries from when I used to wrestle, so I can't push my speed, even when I try to train for that. But I decided I was going to commit to this. And so I wanted to focus on the swim. So I took a whole year just focusing on the swim. So I did a master swim class at the La Jolla Marymount University. I did a couple clinics. And then the summer before this, I did a swim from Dungeness, so here in Port Angeles, Washington area, all the way over to Victoria. So it was a 18-mile swim across the Strait of Juan de Fuca in cold water. And I remember, I chose that one because it was, from my hometown. Why not? And I was just looking for something that was equivalent to the world's toughest, because I'd done the world's toughest cycling race and the world's toughest run. And so I was like, what is the world's toughest swim? And there's nothing that's really outlined as that, but the English Channel is one that's pretty common.
Okay.
And the Strait of Juan de Fuca is equivalent to the English Channel, similar mileage. So I did that as a training swim. And I felt confident enough after that experience that I had a chance at finishing the Catalina one. And so that's how Uberman came about, and kind of what kind of brought me into that. And then it was, we used the Juan de Fuca as our first kind of test fundraiser, and just to make sure I could get my swimming. So we raised a little over $10,000 through a fundraiser through a District 5280 Rotary Club. And then this last year, it was after that swim, I met with the district governor, so the past district governors, current district governors of Rotary, and I was like, I want to do this massive fundraiser for human trafficking, partnering a lot with Cosette, like she was really helping me spearhead it. And I was like, once I'm on this, like I'm all in. So whatever happens this year, and this is like October 2019. So I'm like, whatever happens, like I will find a way to the start and we will make this happen. And who could have known what 2020 was going to be? But it's kind of like that's how, everyone's like, how do you do these things? Like, that's how I do it. You start, you kind of pick a path, you know where you want to go, and then you just go down that path until you get there. And, so that was kind of the catalyst that, in October that, for the next year, I just pursued it until we got to the race and then through it.
Well, and the crazy thing also is, 2020, not just with COVID, and all the restrictions and everything, but also all the wildfires that were happening not that long. Some of them were still going on during the race. Man, so let's talk a little bit more about this race. So I just want to touch on this. I used to think that the kind of the epitome of endurance was the Ironman. So the Ironman is a
2.4 mile swim.
2.4 mile swim.
112
mile bike ride, and a marathon, 26.2. And so I just want to, Rob already mentioned this, but I want to mention that he did a 21 mile swim through the open ocean in shark infested waters. And then he did a 400 mile bike ride, and then a 135 mile run through Death Valley from the lowest point in the continental U.S. to the Mount Whitney portal, which was 8,000...
I think it's 8,600.
8,600 feet. So, and I also just want to touch on the fact my family just knows him as Crazy Rob, because Rob is crazy. So let's talk about this. So you were the most nervous about the swim, as you mentioned. So what was going through your mind when you started the swim at 8:55 p.m. at night in the dark?
Yeah, and it's one of those, like, how do you go through something that, like, what do you do when you come up to an event and you're scared or you're nervous? And I remember working through this. I work with a Christian life coach, Jody Allman, and I started working with her, mainly through Race Across America, as we were talking about highlighting Christine Allman, but I'd had some real fears when I was training, riding my bike in Los Angeles.
Okay.
And so she helped me work through a lot of those fears. And the main reason was, if you're riding defensively, I'm a lot more likely to get injured or hit by things. So it was like, how can I minimize my time out there with traffic? How can I get myself in a good headspace? So going out early in the morning, training early in the morning on sections where there's cars, doing a lot of my training inside on And, so making those adjustments and then getting myself in a mindset of like, it's like looking at real risk and perceived risk. And if I'm taking all these precautions, my actual risk is pretty low. And, but then you still have to calm your heart and your mind. So I worked a lot with Jody, and the hard thing about the swim was, I mentioned the Juan de Fuca swim. So I ended up being in the water a little over 17 hours, and I didn't make it to shore. So we got to the last little point, and I got in this place called Trial Island and basically got whipped around in like a toilet bowl effect. So we tried 3 attempts to hit shore, and my last attempt, the boat said we were 670 feet from shore, and I hit a cross current, and it just pushes you right back out to the middle. And so, you start getting pushed back. And then I remember kind of stopping, and I was talking to the boat captains. It was like 11 at night. We weren't set up for night swimming. And I was like, are you guys, is there any chance that we can get to shore within the next 2 to 4 hours? And they were just like, I don't know. And I was like, let's call it. Like I wanted to do this just to make sure I could cover the distance and the time, and I feel confident in that. So I got out of the water. But so I'd done a few others, and it's like I struggled getting to the shore with currents and with different things. But I know my physical ability level is there. I'm slow, but I can do it. So I spent the time getting ready for that swim. And as you mentioned, because of COVID, like the swimming pools were closed. And and we weren't allowed on the beaches in Los Angeles. So I couldn't go in the ocean, couldn't go in the pools. So I missed, that was the one part of the training. I missed almost all the swim training. In hindsight, missing that training didn't really affect me doing better or more poorly. I would have done a little better in the water, but not a lot. So I mainly just worked on my mental space, and the 3 months before it, I was able to do some lake swims. So I was able to get in about a dozen swims. My longest being about 6 miles, which in ultras, like I try to do at least a third of what I'm jumping into. So it was close to it. But I really just worked on my mental focus, and it was like, I'm gonna call this my prayer swim. And so I reached out to my prayer team and everyone else. I was like, just pray for me this night, and as I'm going through it. And I'm just going to get through a very difficult time as gracefully as possible. And so just putting your mind at ease, and getting ready for, I'd also mentioned like perceived risk and real risk. Like the sharks are there, but there's hardly any shark attacks. The chance of you getting into an incident with wildlife in there is almost none. But they're still there, and that's still in your mind. So like getting that out of your mind. The dark, like I'm not a huge fan of the dark. I especially being solo in the dark makes me nervous. Deep water, I've always been nervous of deep water. The salt, I get, like I think everyone gets this, you get pretty bad salt mouth issues, so your mouth gets swollen, you get these sores in your mouth. So just a lot of factors with it. But I'd come to peace with it about a month beforehand. So going into the water, I remember feeling like okay, like I just got to start and just not stop and keep going forward. And so as you mentioned, we jumped in the water at 8:55 p.m. So we're riding, swimming through the night. And I had it set up where I have 2 kayakers, so they do 3-hour stints. So one's on for 3 hours, then they swap for 3 hours. And we decided I was going to jump on the boat every 3 hours to take like a 5-10 minute break, grab some solid food, which we're allowed to do that on Uberman. You just have to cover the distance. And so, I remember we jumped off the boat, swam to shore. So it's Doctor's Cove and Catalina Island. And then you raise your hand, they start the time, jump back in. And the first half an hour was okay. You can feel kind of the water, as you're getting out past the island, swirling. And then we hit this really choppy water. And we hit the choppy water for about 6 hours. And it wasn't dangerous choppy water, but it's just enough where you can't get a normal stroke. So you have to kind of lift your arm. And I remember the first, at like 3 hours, getting on the boat, and I was talking to you, like, how's it going? And I was like, bad, like really bad. and I was like, me usually, like when I'm in ultras, like my stress level is like a 2 to 3, like I'm in my zone. And it was like 9+, like I was as agitated and, nervous as you get. And finally, after about 6 hours, it got a little calmer. And then I was back to my normal stroke, but my shoulder was pretty sore and achy. So I didn't have my normal strength, which even with that, I'm still a slow swimmer. And so I was like, all right, it's just going to take me a little bit longer. And so, yeah, it was just, getting through that night, And then I remember the next low point on the swim was in the morning, which is usually one of the highlights. Like the morning comes and you're out
Sunlight,
of the dark.
you're not in the dark anymore, yeah.
And I remember I was in the water and I was looking back, and the island, Catalina, was way bigger than Los Angeles area where we're going. And I was like, I kept looking and trying not to look. And it was still like 45 minutes until I got to jump on the boat. And so I remember like, just calm your mind, don't pay attention. And finally I got on the boat and I was like, how far have we gone? And you can kind of see by everyone's faces, and the boat captain's like, we're about halfway. And I was like, oh no. So we were probably 10 or 11 miles, and I should have been about 16, 17 miles. So I was like 6 miles short of where I should have been. And I remember the boat captain and the crew, they were like, as long as it takes you to go out there, like we'll be here for you. And it's like, your crew's gonna be here. And so it was pretty an emotional time for me. I was like, all right, like let's get back in the water. And knowing that I'd hoped to be done around 2 to 4, and it probably would be closer to 8 o'clock or midnight. So it's it was going to be a very long day. But it's like my body will hold up, and as long as you can go forward, you just keep pushing.
Well, and I just have to share a little story too on that, Rob. You touched on when you took that break at 3 hours. So you had just started, you're going, and I figured, man, you'd be super excited because you've been training for Uberman for years. Like, this is such a big deal. It's such a big event. And I remember asking you, Rob, how are you doing? And you're like, I'm in a horrible place. And and so we had the chance to pray together. And but what makes you different than so many other people is 2 minutes later, you're like, okay, let's go. And you just jump right back in. Where most of us would be like, okay, I'm done. No more. I'm good. But yeah, that was pretty amazing to see, Rob. To see. And so the swim took a little bit longer than you expected. So tell us, and I have to add too on the choppy water. So right now on the boat was fine, no problem. I've been on boats quite a bit. It wasn't an issue, as you ride out. But when you turn around and the boat's going the same speed as Rob right next to him, all of a sudden every wave just makes the boat move. And Tom and Tanya, the directors of Hope 61, were on the boat. I know you'd asked them to be there for that portion. And let's just say that was the hardest time for any of us to keep our cookies. We'll keep it that way. And not everyone was able to do that with all the rocking. But tell me about why you'd asked them to come for this portion.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, the swim, I'd kind of had peace about it, and I had this weird feeling for Uberman. I had the same feeling going into Race Across America, where I just felt like I was going to get through it, and I didn't know how, but I was at peace with it. And there's been other events where I haven't felt that way, and you get through some, some you don't. But this one in particular, I was like, I feel like God's going to find a way to to get us through this. But the swim, it just makes me nervous. And so I really wanted to have a prayer group around me, and so reaching out to Tom and Tanya, there's a few other prayer mentors, and just having, and even when I was out there in the midst of that struggle, going through the choppy water, to know, like, a lot of what kept me through is like knowing that I have this support team around me. I have some of the people closest to me right on the boat. We're doing this for this incredible cause, and all I got to do is keep going. It doesn't have to be pretty. I don't have to be fast. I just have to not stop. And so it's like in the midst of that, like, what keeps you going? And it's like, once you decide you're not going to stop, there's really only one thing you can do, and that's to move forward. And so it's like, once you make that decision, like, no matter what I need to do to make this happen, like, I'm just going to move forward. It's actually really simple. Like, it's hard and it's difficult, but it's simple. All you can do is move forward, and it puts you in this place where you find a way to get through it. And it's like, God will make a way for us to get through this. And then it's just connecting, a lot of like, what do you think about, or how do you get through it? It's like, well, I think about him and I connect about that. And I think about the people praying for him, and I think about, the groups and the impact that they're having. And sometimes I think about silly stuff. Like, what do you think about when you're, when you're doing dishes or laundry? It's like, oh, a song pops in my head. Or I think about, it's like, what are my kids doing right now? Or, and one thing I do in altars is I take these visual snapshots. So I've done this ever since I have kids. right when I'm heading out to the course, when I say goodbye to them, I take this like visual snapshot of what they look like so that when I'm out there on the course, it's like right there. I can pull it right up and it's like, that's what Hudson looks like, that's what Calais looks like. But it pulls you right back into that moment, and so you can capture it and then come right back to the present.
That's really cool, Rob. That's really cool. And I have to say too, after we had that conversation after the first break, it really was an example of what faith is to me, because it was so dark out there where, you're in the water, again, open water, a place that you're really scared of, on top of just being pitch black outside. But your faith to just say, like you said, to not quit, and I'm just going to do it. I'm going to go in, and to get right back in the water when you feel like you're in a horrible place and just trust that you're going to keep going was such an amazing example. So great job. So Rob, you're going in the swim.
Mm-hmm.
It's you mentioned to me before that was one of the hardest days of your life, if not the hardest day.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me about, as you got farther along in the swim, after we're like 15, 16 miles, kind of tell me what was going on there.
Yeah, so we got to the 16-mile mark, and everything was going pretty well. I mean, thankfully through the day we had great currents. It was a good day. It was fueling well. Didn't have, I ended up using a lot of Hammer nutrition products, which I've used a little in the past, and they were just awesome. Like, didn't have any energy issues, and I was just shocked. Like, I was like, everything was just dialed in. And then we hit that 16-mile mark, and I remember going in, and Gareth was the kayaker at the time, and whenever Gareth was there, I was like on for 3 hours, and then my buddy Tor would come out, and I would go a little bit easier. I'd still push, but I wasn't as on. And so Gareth was on, and so for 3 hours I'm just jamming. And I get out to take my little break, and everyone has that same look as right at dawn, and I was like, what's going on? Like, aren't we about 2-3 miles from shore? And the boat captain's like, you went like 0.72 miles in those 3 hours. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh crap.
And how fast do you normally go? What's kind of a normal speed?
So I'm usually a mile to a mile and a quarter an hour. So
Okay.
I should have covered about 3 miles.
Okay.
So at the 5 mile, I should have been about 2 miles out. And so what happens was my effort's the same, but you're hitting these cross currents or these tides that are pushing you in and out. So I was realizing like I'd missed that window of opportunity where you can make it to shore. So I talked to the captain. I was like, is there any way like that the tide's going to shift in like an hour or 6 hours, or what's it look like? He said it looks like it should shift in about an hour. So I was like, let's take a break for an hour and get back in the water and see if it gets any better. The other thing, that last hour of that 3 hours, as I was swimming, there was a few things that happened in the water. I got stung by like 7 jellyfish, so everything that was exposed, but they're tiny little ones, it's not a big deal. But you get stung, and I'd realize like, I'd breathe, and then I'd look down, and when I get stung, I would actually look down in the water, and you're like, oh yeah, there's like fish and jellyfish. But out of the 25 hours I ended up ultimately spending in the water, I looked down less than 5 minutes, so I hardly ever looked down. I just pretended I was just as gracefully as possible getting through this. But anyways, as I was doing that, that last hour, I would take a breath, and then I'd look down, and then I'd hear this pop, pop, and then breath, and look down, and pop, pop. And in the back of my throat, the salt water started dripping down, and so my throat was getting a little bit narrower. And what I realized was like, that's my pulse against my throat, and it wasn't too concerning for me. I was like, I got to kind of keep an eye on it. But I noticed I had to kind of stop a little bit more to catch my breath because I wasn't getting as much breath. But so I was like, oh, I got to keep an eye on it. But it wasn't anything like super, that I had to attend to at the time. And I took that hour break, and then I got back in the water. And about 15 minutes into it, I look up at the captain, and he just kind of shook his head. So I hadn't made any forward progress. And also my throat was about the same, getting worse. And so I got back in the boat, and I was like, let's just call it a night. And we'll start on the bike, because I just didn't see a way right then where it made sense to continue the swim, just logistically and safety-wise. It's one of those, as an ultra athlete, it's funny because your crew wants you to go right up to the edge and right up to that limit, but they also don't want you to go over. Like, nobody wants to see the athlete in the hospital or have a major event, and they trust you to be able to say, to call it when you need to. And actually, as the athlete, it's not your responsibility to call it. You put that on the crew chief. So it's the crew chief's decision to either pull you or not. And for the boat, I had my friend Brian Sarvis in that spot. And I know when it's that point, and it was that point where it was the right decision to call it. And, so I kind of talked to everyone, are you guys okay with this decision? And so I felt good about it. Like I felt at peace with it. It was the right thing to do, given this scenario.
Yeah, and I have never met anyone that knows themselves better than you do. And the fact that you knew at that time, like, I'm not going anywhere. Like, I could get back in the water, but what's the point? I still have the rest of the race to do. Because at that point, you could have just said, okay, I'm done. The race is over. I haven't. But you decided to continue on with the rest of the race, the bike, the run. So tell me about that thought process and kind of how getting started there.
Yeah, so for me, like going into it, it was, I had that feeling I was going to find a way to get through it, but it was like, regardless of what happens, like you just go on to the next thing and you just keep moving forward. So you don't stop until you're at the end. And so for me, it was like, I got stopped there, but it's like, of course you would go. For me, it's like, of course you would go to the bike. And the only question is, do I go right to shore right now and get right on my bike and ride through the night? Or do you stop and get a good night's sleep? And for me, just with how much kind of trauma I'd gone through, I was like, let's just call it a night, go and get a good night's sleep, start at daylight, just start fresh. And so I felt good about that. We went to shore. I think we got there at like 8, went to the hotel. I went to bed around 10. I woke up wide awake, just like I always do at like 11:30. Because once I'm kind of in the zone on these, it's just, you're in such a different mind space. And, and I tend to sleep about an hour and a half to 3 hours a night, usually around an hour and a half. But then I just kind of laid there the rest of the night, waiting for the morning. And and then we, went right back to where we got out of the water and started the bike ride.
Now tell me about someone you saw during the bike ride. There was another person that was doing the race.
Oh yeah, so so for Uberman this year there was one other girl that she did a modified Uberman, so she did the swim route and then the bike route and then the 135, and she ended up having some really bad blisters on the 135, so she called it on that. But they had a relay team. They had James Lawrence, who's known as the Iron Cowboy. So he's best known for the guy who did the 50 Ironman in 50 states in 50 days, which is like right on the edge of physical limitations, but also logistically, it's pretty much impossible. It's one of those like you can't believe he pulled it off, and then like on multiple layers, like I can't believe he pulled it off. So I was able to meet him and the rest of the relay team right as they were starting, and Kat, their swimmer, started a day after me. That's how we ran into him. So she's like, world record holder, done a bunch of stuff, just elite level swimmer. And so she was just coming in as I was getting ready for the bike, and I ran into, so she did the swim part, and then it was James Lawrence on the bike, and then his friend Casey did the run. So I got to see him there, and then we ran into their crew later on the route as well.
All right. So on the bike, so you had said earlier that you were really excited to get on the bike, to get away from the water and to be on something that you're comfortable with. Mm-hmm. But there was one point where we're in the van, we're riding right behind you as you're going, and I start to see you kind of like steer like you want to get off the road, and I just thinking, Rob, what are you doing? And then I see the front tire, the second that it gets off of the lip of the concrete, boom, the bike just goes down. So tell me what happened and what was going through your mind at that point?
So that was the second day on the bike ride. So I rode through the first night, and then we slept like an hour and a half. And then the second day we're going, it was about 3 p.m, and I started flagging, which is when we were like, you're exhausted and need to sleep. But I didn't think much of it. And then about 10, 15 minutes later, I woke up and I'm literally like 6 inches to a foot from the ground. So I fell asleep on the bike and went off the road. And so, I scraped up my hip, banged my knee, and then my ankle. But yeah, I'd fallen asleep on my bike a couple times before and hit the rumble strips to wake me up, but there weren't any rumble strips, so I crashed.
And tell me about the injuries that you sustained from that, because it wasn't just, you got the road rash, pretty major road rash, and...
Yeah, I looked at it, so I ended up getting off the road, and I took like a 20-minute break to kind of take a little power nap. And I wasn't too concerned about anything right away. And then as I started riding, my ankle started giving me a more and more struggle through the rest of it. And I think we still had another 60 or 80 miles after that. And especially at the end of it, every time I'd clip out, I could feel that sharp pain. So I'd done either like a side lateral sprain or some injury to the ankle.
And this ride was pretty intense too. It was pretty amazing to see. It was beautiful driving through kind of Death Valley and going along. But there was one point where I actually had to give someone a ride to the airport. So I had to leave the crew for a little while, take him, because the swim kind of pushed things back a little bit. And we're going up over this pass in the car and then coming down the other side where it's pitch black. There's no lights on the side. And I'm just looking at this going, how is this the end of the ride? Like that you go through this, 300 and some miles, and then to get to 400, you're going up over this 5,000 foot pass?
4,000 of town pass, yeah.
And then going down these roads where there's no lights. You just have to trust the car behind you and the headlights. But so what was that like at the end of the bike portion to go over this intense?
Yeah, so I mean the bike cross is pretty. It has about 20,000 feet of climbing. So it's not like super gnarly, but it's a climb. Like it's a tough course, and you're going through the desert, especially through Mojave. You have like pretty aggressive winds. So thankfully I had a bunch of tailwinds, but there was about 8 miles where it was pretty strong headwind. And to the point where right before I got to the hotel, like we went up and over this overpass and the wind blew me so hard, like my back tire came off and I went into the rail. I didn't crash and I was going really slow, but it was like, so then I went out to the middle of the road and, it was going really slow but you're like pushing against this headwind. But thankfully it was just a very short period of that. But it's one of those, like you prepare for it. Like I spent the whole year gearing up on running and cycling. And one of the main training rides where I felt really helped me, I did this double ride out in Inyo, so right up by Death Valley. And the first day we had a lot of winds, and then the second day we had like 40 miles of headwinds. And it's one of those, it sucks, but you're just out there and it's like, so I got 40 miles of headwinds, and a lot of people like, I'm not even gonna do the second day. Like I know it's gonna be miserable. But you think about it, like say I average 15 miles an hour and then I have a headwind, so it drops me down to 8. So instead of being out there 2.5 hours, you're out there more like 5 hours. So it's like, it's an extra 2.5 hours. So yes, it's hard and it sucks and you're not moving as fast, but you just can't think about the time of it. You're just like, I'm just here to pedal. Like it doesn't have to be pretty. I don't have to be fast. I just have to keep moving forward. And with that attitude, it gets you through so many of the obstacles. And eventually, like after the wreck, you get back on the bike. Town Pass, we got so fortunate hitting those large climbs at night. So I just ended up powering up the pass. Like it wasn't a major. I mean, it was actually one of the funner parts of the course for me. And then cruising down the backside, you have 18 miles of aggressive downhill, and then it's pretty flat and rolling all the way to Badwater Basin. And I think we came in around 2 a.m. And then you get a nice chunk of sleep before going out in the morning to start the run. But the hard thing was going to bed that night. I reached out to Jody Allman because I was like, my ankle's bugging me and I think it's sprained and I don't even know if I can run. And so it's like when you're getting ready to start a race that has more than 5 marathons and I don't even know if I can like walk on it well. And just that uncertainty. But it's like, I'm going to get up in the morning, go out, I'll start moving and I'll see what happens.
And speaking of obstacles, before we go on to the run part, I just want to go back to a story that you had told me back on the swim. So tell me about the cap that you were wearing, Rob.
Oh yeah. So this is how little I know about open water swimming. So I have this open water swim cap, and it's like thick, kind of rubbery. And it's great, but I was swimming through the choppy water and you're kind of just getting banged around with the waves. It feels like these soft punches. And so I was like, I'm just going to get rid of this cap. So I take it off and I handed it to Gareth. And within 3 minutes,
who's on the kayak?
Within 3 minutes, I was like getting seasick and just getting pummeled with the waves, just like bam, bam, bam. And so I realized like the caps are like helmets, so they protect your head. And I just had no idea. And I was like, thank God I had that, because if I didn't have that, I probably would have found a way through it, but I don't know how I would have gotten through that choppy water. And so it's like somehow I have I was fortunate enough to have it along with me and to have it in my gear set, and even though I didn't know what it was used for.
And you had the intelligence to wear it, even though you didn't know what it was used for at first too. That's great. So you finished the bike portion, you're getting ready for the run, and I just want to ask you, because I actually haven't asked you this before, but I know you started all your endurance things with running and hiking. What are you more comfortable with now, the bike or the run?
Running, I always feel like I'm a trail runner. Like running's my base. I'm probably more steady on the bike. Like biking's probably the easiest one out of all of them for me. But running's the one I enjoy the most. It's the one I feel is like the most spiritual for me. And I think because it's so hard, like it's such a raw type thing, and you're out there, and there's so many variables to it that are still within your control. So I think I appreciate the running the most, but the cycling's probably the easiest at this point.
You know, this was my first time being on crew for any of your events, but there were a lot of people that had been on other events, including the RAM, the Race Across America. And many of them mentioned that on the bike, they actually felt like you were a lot stronger now than you were then when you did the Race Across America. But now you're starting the run, 135 miles, lowest point in the continental U.S. to 8,600 feet. And the goal was to go to the top of Mount Whitney, which is the highest point in the continental U.S. outside of Alaska. So tell me about how that went. Were you comfortable at that time? Was your ankle bothering you? Like what was...
Yeah, so thankfully I started the run, and within the first 2 miles, like I could feel my ankle was swollen, I could feel the pain, but I would call it like a level 2-3 pain for me. And within a couple miles, it just went to pressure, and so I was like, oh, good. It's so I think it was like a lateral sprain, or I'm not exactly sure what the injury was, but it didn't affect my forward walking and jogging. So then we started moving through the first 17, 18 miles went great. So that's kind of the first checkpoint, is getting to Furnace Creek. So there was a pool there. So I took a little break, jumped in the pool with my kids for about 20 minutes, kind of restock everything, and then get back, heading out to the next checkpoint. And it was that next point, like things were going good, but like time slowed down a lot. And so it just... And for some reason, and I think they call it, I was just listening to some other podcasts about people that run through Death Valley, and it's that next section they call like the death zone. And it's like, it's where everyone falls apart. And it's so freaking hot and kind of flat and rollers and this long stretch. So we were going through there, and they got the photo from Furnace Creek, and it was like 105 degrees. So it was supposed to be like 90, but it's 105. So I was like, it feels hotter than 90. And they're like, yeah. And so it was very hot going through there. But I'd gone through a few years before when it was like 117. So I've experienced the heat, and it's one of those, like, it's the power of having crew. Like I just have people there, and they basically just soak you in ice. You have ice around your neck. You constantly have cold fluids going in. So you pass through this very tumultuous, like hard experience, but as gracefully as possible, because you have the right equipment and the right gear around you. So that went well. First day went well. The next day, the climbs, again, we hit the climbs at night. And I had Adam Scully Powers, who's the guy the last year who beat the record for Uberman. So he's the current world champion for Uberman. So he was out there the one day on the bike and then the 2 days on the run. So it was great just to have him there to talk to and kind of walk me through a lot of it. And actually the big thing that came up on the run was the third day. So we're about 13 miles out from Lone Pine. So we had about a marathon left of it. So we're 4 marathons done, 1 to go. And it was only like 90 degrees, but all of a sudden I could feel my heat rising in my body, and my pulse rate. I could feel my pulse start to race. And I was like, oh crap, like I think I'm having heat issues. So I remember talking to the crew, and I was like, I need to stop. And they're like, oh no, you're fine. And I was like, I need to stop. And they're like, the RV was parked about 1.5 miles ahead. So I made it to the RV, and I got in, I was like, I need to take a full rest. So I took a cold shower, they cranked on the AC, and I wasn't tired, but I just needed to get my pulse back to normal. So I ended up just calling people. So I called probably 20, 30 people, and these 3 to 5 minute conversations. And it was such an amazing way to like reach out to my prayer team, to support just people. And in about an hour and a half into it, I could feel my pulse drop down, and and then it was late in the evenings. It was in the evening, so the sun was just coming down as well. So I was like, okay, my pulse is down, and it's going to get cooler. So I felt confident to move forward. And after leaving the RV, like I just had, it was probably one of the easier marathons of my life. Like I just had these positive conversations in my head. I had the crew around you. There's you around me. There's me. There's you. Brian Sarvis. A bunch of other people there. Gay Hunter.
Yeah.
So just to chat with people that I've trained with and known over the years. And then we made it to Lone Pine. I slept for about an hour and a half. And then we did the climb up to the Whitney portal, and going up there, with Kristen, so my wife, having her for sections of it, and just, Manly. There's this guy Manly who's just one of the most amazing crew and supporters you could have. This is the first time I've had him on my crew, but having him along was just great. And but literally it was probably one of the more comfortable marathons. And I remember getting close to the top, and we had climbed a lot faster than everyone had thought. So I think we were about an hour and a half ahead of schedule. So I had to call down to get Brian up so he could meet us there at the top before we hit the portal. And it was interesting hitting the portal because, going into this, one of the things was there's all these wildfires. We didn't know if we were going to have issues with wildfires with the smoke. They'd closed down the top of the road. So it was like the week before where they opened up the last 4 miles so you could even make it to the portal. And from the portal to the top has been shut down for months. And so they're not giving any permits. And the plan was, if we were able and if we could, I wanted to go all the way up to the summit of Whitney. And weather conditions were good, like everything was good except for the trails closed. And I remember Brian getting, had these conversations with him. He's like, I don't think we can find a way. I don't think we can do it. And I remember talking to him, I was like, Brian, if we're meant to do it, the world will conspire for our goodness and it'll happen. And I remember his answer. He's just, I just love your attitude. And Brian's one of those guys in my life, like I'll wait 10 minutes to make sure he's there to get to the sign. And so to have him and Kristen and everyone there was just such a powerful experience to finish it. And I'll go back to the swim. So it was the end of the first day of the bike. I had this idea, and I was like, I think I'm supposed to finish the swim. And so I called Jody Allman, and I was like, I think I'm supposed to finish the swim. And I was like, I think if I reach out to the race director, I think he'll let me do it. And so I was like, I'm not going to tell anybody, but I think I'm going to do this. I still have 2 monsters ahead of me. So she's like, okay. And she's like, okay. And then I got through the bike ride, and then into the run. And I kept asking for when's the race director coming on the course, because he was planning on coming out, and it was the second day I found out he wasn't going to come out to the course. He had some other stuff. And so I was like, man, how am I going to talk to him? And I had these 2 videographers with me. So I pulled Luke, kind of my main videographer side. I was like, can you do a little recording? So we did this basically plea to Dan Burke, who was the race director. And I was like, I came out here to finish this thing and to do every piece of it. And it's like, it's so important to me to get through this well. And there's, I just want to experience every part of the course. And my plan is to go to the summit and then go straight back to LA and get on the first boat I can with a good tide and make it to shore. And I was like, if I do this, will it be official? Will you count it? So we had gotten to the bottom. And the bottom of that next hill after recording it, so it was probably 5 hours later, and my wife Kristen had sent the video to him, and then he responded, and I had Adam read it, and we got it on video, so Adam almost choked up. And he's like, Dan's response was absolutely, it'll count, go down there, we'll have the hammer, which is the thing you get at the end. We'll meet you on the shore, and I'll see you there, which basically put us back in the race. So getting to the Whitney summit, that was no longer the end. I still had to go back to LA, jump on the next boat, and then finish out the swim.
But for the record, Rob is only the 7th person to ever finish the Uberman, which is the world's toughest triathlon. And then the plan was then to go to the top of Mount Whitney. The race ends at the portal, but Rob's plan was to go to the top to be the first person to ever do that, because no one has ever done that. Do you feel like, and I know, Rob, I love Rob's integrity, because he just said, I'm not going to do it unless we can do it legally. I'm not going to sneak past the boundaries and do it. But Do you feel like, looking back, do you feel like you still could have done that on top of after finishing all the rest of this crazy race?
Yeah, and we talked about that. I talked to Brian right before that. I was like, I felt so much stronger this time than I did 2 years ago, and my feet didn't get nearly as blistered, and I was just, I felt like getting up to the top of the portal. I was like, I felt so much more prepared to go to the top and down. I think it would have been a much easier experience than my first one, that summit experience was the hardest day of my life, because I was so exhausted after the 135. But this one, I still felt fresh, like I still had a lot in me. But it was just, I remember getting there, I was like, and with Brian, and seeing the close signs, and I was like, we're not supposed to do it this time, like we still got a swim to do, and so there's something different on this one. And so we headed back to the swim, and I remember, so from the finish to when I got in the water, it was like 23 hours. So I stayed in race mode as much as I could, because I just like, I still got to be in this, because I don't want to get distracted. And so, we went down. Kristen had reached out to the boat captain. It was the same boat captain that was on the big ship. He borrowed I think he borrowed like a 23-foot inflatable boat. So it's like the Navy SEALs go out. And he's like, meet me at the dock at 4 a.m. We'll go out. We'll hit the water. And then Gareth Evans is a good friend of mine. He was like, he reached out to Kristen. He was like, well, I want to kayak with him. And she's like, you can't. Like, it's a small boat. And he's like, I want to kayak him in. And he's like, you can't. And then she was like, you can swim with him. So he had done a couple Ironman like years before, but I don't think he'd swam in years. So he came out, and I get on the boat, and he's in his wetsuit. And so we hit the dock at 4, go out. I think we hit the water around 5:50, and it's dark, and it's cloudy, like it's foggy, like and I remember thinking like, this is about as close as civilians get to like military stuff as possible. And it's like, this is pretty exciting. Like, drive out at 5 a.m. or take a boat out at 5 a.m. Drop off 4 miles off the coast of Palos Verdes, and then swim into shore. And so we dropped off, and Gareth went in with me, and he swam the whole 4 miles in with me. And it's one of those, you'd think that a 4 mile swim after all this stuff would be easy, but literally that was the second hardest day of my life. And I learned and grew so much through that time. And that's a lot of the faith journey and the thing. And what happened was, when I got in the water, I'd experienced this before, but I used to call it bad time. Jamaica, my mechanic, calls it hero's work, where you call it kind of flagging. But it's when you get so exhausted and you kind of have that 1,000-yard stare, and it's almost like your spirit disconnects from your body. And as soon as that happens, you lose all time reference. So 5 minutes might as well be like an hour or a week. You're lost in eternity. So you have to bring yourself back and like keep yourself in as much peace as you can, because you're there forever. And so I'm like paddling, and and people around you don't really notice, because your form's about the same. So I had that happen over and over, and I'd pull myself back, and I'd be back in it. And about halfway through it, I was just like, I need to stop. So we got in the boat, and I took as much caffeine as I felt like responsible enough to do. So like, 3 cups of coffee, I had a Coke, I had like 2 caffeine pills, and I jumped back in the water. And so then I was like good for about a half an hour, and then I'm like off in La La Land again. But eventually, like I remember we got close to shore, and it was still foggy, so you couldn't even see it. So they were like, oh, you're like 15 minutes out. And I remember asking Gareth, I was like, are we like 4 hours out or 5 hours? He's like, no, we're right there. We're right there. And so I'm like, okay. And so I was like, I need to stop for a second. They're like, no, you're right there. There's like one more solid push. And so I pushed. I remember getting to shore, like through the fog, you can kind of see the people in the shore. And I got up there, and kind of over the rocks as it's, the waves are kind of crashing in. So it's you have to be a little careful as you get on shore. And then I remember kind of talking to people, and all of a sudden this thought hits me. I was like, oh crap, I know they're recording me, like, and I'm not even here. So I've watched it a few times since then, but it's, I was looking, I was like, oh, kind of give me a second. And I took a deep breath and went like this, and you can feel kind of your essence and your spirit come back, and then it's like, you're there. And, and then it's like just talking and sharing, but it was such a powerful experience to be able to push through those times where you're just not all in your head, and you have to kind of come back and and trust in the people around you, and and pass through it, and you just got to move forward, like you just find a way.
So tell me now, this was like a month ago. So we're not talking like last year, or So tell me, how has it been for you since the race? I know that you're still recovering from the ankle injury. So how have you felt since the race?
Yeah, and I've that's my phone. Sorry. We'll wait till it quits ringing.
So you want to ask that question again?
Yeah, and can you set it on the floor because it'll hit when I get the message. It'll hit again. You'll get this little ding. It's probably my wife. That's fine.
He's trying to get in your wallet too.
So that's the question again. So how do I feel recovering from the race?
Yeah. Are you ready?
Yeah.
So Rob, how have you felt since the race? How have you felt kind of recovering from the race?
Yeah, so since the race, tomorrow will be a month from when I finished it. And I mean, thankfully I've done enough ultras and I'm around a lot of people in this community, so you kind of know what to expect. And the first 2 weeks, you're kind of on this high. It's just an amazing experience where, do you know that voice in your head that says like you're stupid and you can't do this and you suck? That's just gone. And so you feel so focused and driven and it's just this incredible kind of place. And I try to be just really careful afterwards, like just don't make any big decisions, just stay as steady as you can. So I went through that, and then you can kind of feel the drop, and then you kind of feel a couple weeks where you're kind of in a funk, and it takes anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks to kind of get back to your new normal, but it's one of those. I always try to tell people, like, the thing about like Race Across America or this one, the person I was a month ago and the person I am today is a completely different person. Like, you change so much and you learn so much about yourself, like the spiritual, mental, physical connection of what you do. And also that connection, for me, that connection to God. Like I passed through an experience and, in Race Across America, about 4 days into it, I had this thing where I had this experience where all of a sudden I felt this protection, and I just felt like God and His angel armies were guarding me, and the whole rest of the time was just fun. It was just a journey. And this one, I felt like that from the start. Like, I just felt so protected, and so it's like I wasn't worried about like the injuries or the fear or these different things. Like, you're just passing through a journey, and so to go through a whole week like that, and then to come out the other side, it's almost like, for those of you who play video games, it's like your character's on like level 10 and all of a sudden you're immediately jumped up to like level 20. So you come out the other side a very different person, and you have different ability levels. You can perform at a different level. You can connect with people differently. You're more empathetic, and so kind of leaning into those. But you have to pass through that high and then the low, and then you come back to the new normal. And so for me, like right now, I'm just coming out of that funk. And a lot of it, I think, biologically is just you've spent all the endorphins and different stuff, so they're just tapped out, and it takes them a while to get back. I don't know how medically sound that is, but it just sounds right.
It sounds good to me, Rob.
But yeah, so it's nice to I'm finally feeling back to that normal, and then you're back at your new normal. It's like, what can I do now, and how can I continue to use the lessons that I've learned to continue to grow?
Well, I have to say, I mean, when we really reconnected, we've stayed in touch over the years, but really reconnected a few years ago before the Race Across America. And I remember hearing about that and going from the coast of California to the coast of Maryland in 12 days, 3,000 miles, averaging 250 miles a day, averaging an hour and a half of sleep every night. And I just remember thinking, that is way beyond what I ever would have thought was possible. And then this race fits up there too. I mean, I never would have thought that being able to do this 21-mile swim and then a 400-mile bike ride and then 135-mile run right after would be possible. And so watching you, it just really raises the concept of what's impossible for a person to do. So, and it was so encouraging to watch you, and just to watch you go through all of that, to watch you go through the struggle of not being able to finish the swim, falling asleep on the bike, overheating on the run, and then still to be able to push through and make it through. I'm so impressed and so happy to call you my friend. So with this, so we talked about you doing this to raise money for organizations to fight a cause. So when all was said and done, how much money did you raise to fight human trafficking?
Yeah, so we had three main groups. It was Hope 61, In Our Backyard, and 1736. And then we raised it through Rotary District 5280. And between all of those accounts and stuff, we raised just over 55,000. So yeah,
That's
so our
awesome.
goal was 50, so we hit it. So
Yeah.
good.
Woohoo! Well,
Yeah.
I know on behalf of Hope 61, we are so excited and to partner with you on this, but also to call you, a part of Hope 61. You've gone and done trainings with us in India, which was so amazing. Along with Luke, your videographer, came as well, and so we're just so grateful for the opportunity to just be a part of your journey and to have you be a part of ours. So thank you so much for all of that.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's good to share.
So the real question on everybody's mind after hearing this, Rob, is what's next? I mean, you must have this crazy, ridiculous, like something higher than the Uberman to do next, right?
Yeah, for me, I've been grinding on the ultras pretty steadily for a while now. So I actually wanted to take a couple years just to really focus on family and business, and then fine-tuning a couple speed things. So I'm taking the next 2 years. This year I grabbed one of my friends, Kyle Downs, who's my main kind of speed training partner. So we're going after the sub 3-hour marathon, which I've tried 3 times. So I'm 0 for 3. So we'll see how it turns out next October. So I have a year to train for that. But a lot of that is like, I need to get faster. I want to get faster. And it's like, so you have this goal, this outrageous goal, and then you chase it. And whether you hit it or don't hit it really doesn't matter. You're moving towards it. And so I think a lot of that is that the journey is important. And, and people see me, like, especially the last 4 years, like those people who've known me the last 4 or 5 years, like, man, Rob's successful, he knocks it out, he hits these things. They don't see the 15 years of failure and the 15 years of like not hitting your times and not finishing races. And my first 100 I DNF'd on. My race across Oregon, like the first ultra bike race, I DNF'd on it. And so it's like you have all these setbacks and you train for like a year or two for these things and then you don't finish them. And then it's like, what do you do next? And you kind of go back and retool and then go back to it. So for me, like I'm excited to be back in what I call the workshop. So the next 2 years is kind of fine-tuning some skills. I really want to help some other people raise some money and awareness for different events. I'm trying to do that for at least a few people per year the next couple years. One of the things that's fascinating to me about the ultras is like at the end of all this, when I was on the beach in Palos Verdes, at the end of a marathon, you're excited and you're like, yes, I finished. At the end of an ultra, it's like the opposite feeling. So you're so humbled and you're just like, thank God I got through that experience. Like, I can't believe I found a way. I'm just so amazed at the people I'm connected with. And that was one of the things that really stuck out on this one. I always kind of, one of the things with people I'm fascinated with, I always ask them what their superpower is. And one of mine has always been like, I'm very comfortable being very uncomfortable. And I say that like calmly to most people, but it's like literally like I can be like half dead on the side of the street and I was like, I'm fine, like I'll get up and I'll keep moving. So I'm comfortable being very uncomfortable. But through this, I realized like I'm also really good at bringing together some of the most incredible people in the world. And seeing some of those people come on crew and the different organizations, I was like, one of my giftings that I feel like is one of my superpowers is bringing together just incredible people. And so I was like, I really want to fine tune that the next few years, helping some other people raise awareness, building out my teams with my work, spending some intentional time with my family. I just moved back to my hometown, so connecting with my hometown, and kind of focusing on that. And then, we'll see in like 3 or 4 years what's out there. Like I have a few things in my mind, but I'm not sure which direction yet. And it's kind of one of those, you're kind of waiting to see where the world pulls you.
Yeah.
But I have a couple, kind of thoughts on things. But for the next 2 years, I'm just focusing on going deep with helping some other people and working on some speed training. And I also grabbed a couple guys to kind of build a base on, which is you. So you and then my another good friend, TJ McConaughey. So over the next 2 years is kind of building you guys up to doing your first ultra. It's the first 50K, kind of walking, running, and which you probably would have thought was impossible a month ago, but after seeing what God does through us and how our bodies can change and just what can happen with our minds, like it's like, oh, that's hard and it's not pretty, but it's like, this is doable. Like this is something that we could do if I go down that path. So.
Well, I mean, I just have to say, with that, it was such a amazing thing to see you and to see what a person is capable of. But, I hadn't walked or ran or done anything along those lines for a long time. So wasn't planning on doing anything, but ended up doing 3.5 miles with you one day. And then the next day, Adam, who had come to run with you, had to leave, and he's like, Darren, you need to go do some miles with Rob. So Rob, of course, you're like, Darren, you're committing to a 10K today. You're going to do 6 miles. And so partway through that, you're like, Darren, you should do 10 miles today. And so the fact that, able to do that really kind of changed my mind and what I was capable of. And so, yeah, it's been really great, and, been able to do, a lot of miles since. I can't remember offhand, but I know it's been over 60 miles that I've done, in the month since the race. And so it's been pretty amazing to see that. So, but with that, I just, you talked about what's next. And when you first told me that your plans were to really focus on your family, the fact that your wife had sacrificed a lot to let you train and do this, and you really wanted to focus on her. And then also with Kyle, his goal, this guy who's helped you train for these, you want to come alongside it, and he wants to train for a sub 3-hour marathon, and you want to come along and support him, is just so amazing. And I think it says so much and why your crew is so committed to like being able to do anything for you, because they know that you would do anything for them. Mm-hmm. So I just think it says a lot about you as a person, and I'm so excited to be a part of that journey, and just to continue to see where it goes. Mm-hmm. So is there anything else you want to talk about or bring up on this, from this crazy race?
Yeah, I think that's the main point. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming in and taking the time today, Rob, to be with us. And I just, like I said, I just really appreciate you as a person, just as a brother, and am so excited to see where God continues to use you. So thank you so much for all that you've done, Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron.
All right, brother.
Let's do one more close.
Okay.
We'll start wide. Well, thank you so much. And just address this camera right here.
The middle one?
This one?
The middle one.
Oh, the middle one.
Yeah. And whenever I'll count you in. Start in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Well, Rob, we just want to thank you so much for taking the time today to come in and.
Hold it. When you do it, just talk to him like you're normally talking to him.
Okay.
Yeah.
And me look at him like I'm normally talking to him? Okay.
Yeah, just like you were, yeah.
Just look deep into my eyes.
All right, I'll count you back in. Okay.
All right.
All right, smiles. Okay. We'll start in 5, 4, 3.
Rob, I just want to say thank you so much for coming in and taking the time to spend here today, and just for all that you do.
Yeah, no, thanks. It was quite the journey, and it was great to have you along.
Thanks, brother.
Okay, one more time. Acknowledge the audience. So like it's just like we were before, like we're talking to an audience. So acknowledge the audience at home. But what you're doing is you're talking to the camera like it was Rob. So when you're saying thank you, Rob, for coming in.
Okay.
So
Rob.
talk to me and then talk to the audience.
Exactly. So talk to both. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
All right, I'll count you back in. All right, let's start in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Well, thank you so much, Rob, for taking the time to come in today, and we just want to say thank you for coming and hanging out with us, and for all that you do.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It was great to share about the Uberman and the ups and downs, and it's great to have you along.
Perfect. All right, thank you.
All right.